Okay, this is the 11th of September Node modules meeting. We're coming up on almost a month until the V12 LTS. So we've got to be very careful with our agendas at this point, I think. So let's get going with today's agenda. The first item we had was, actually, before I start, is there someone available to take notes for today's meeting?
Give me a second.
No takers. Thank you, Bradley. Right. So the first item was update phase 3 per the current status. Issue number 382, and this is a PR by Jeffrey, updating our current phased implementation plan. Jeffrey, did you want to introduce that?
Oh, I'm already unmuted. Sure. I mean, I don't think there's anything like surprising or controversial here. It's just kind of an update reflecting where we stand. I don't know if people want to suggest any broader changes as a result of anything we're trying to talk about today, but updating links. I moved exports into the done section. And I think that's it. Yeah, updated some statuses.
Jordan?
I'm not sure about how LTS exactly would work here, but is unflagging exports for CJS, and let's say we land the PR that has @ for example, as a shortcut to resolve to the package root, unflagging both of those for CommonJS, is that something that could happen in V12 while it's still in CJS, like in a minor? Or is that something that people would likely be gun shy about once 12 has entered LTS? I'm basically asking, should we try to find a way to get those things merged and unflagged in CJS sooner than later?
I was under the impression that that was the current expectation, because we don't want to be landing features on CommonJS after LTS. So if we do want to do it, and if we want to do it for both ESM and CommonJS, then we should be getting it in with the LTS.
Okay. Well, I mean, unflagging ESM is a longer discussion than unflagging these two features for CJS. My hope is that while obviously it's great if we can all find a way to agree on unflagging all of these things for 12 LTS, even if ESM does not get unflagged for 12 LTS, I would like to see those two features unflagged for CommonJS for Node 12 LTS. So if that's not, unless somebody has an objection to doing that in that eventuality, I'd like to make sure that we take whatever steps we need to do to get towards that goal.
Jan, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think I agree with Jordan that trying to unflag the CommonJS affecting things earlier or as early as possible might be good, also because they are about changes in behavior. So they are actually things that can break people. So having more discussion around it and expecting more discussion around it is reasonable. So if we can start the process of unflagging them early, it might de-risk unflagging modules.
Right. It also takes a whole big conversation topic out of the ESM part, because then it's just kind of a given for ESM once CJS has it.
Can I just get back to this for a second? Does anyone have any objections to this PR? Or can I just merge it in? This doesn't really relate to what gets unflagged or so on.
You scroll down a little bit. I should look this myself, but yeah, I think it's fine to land.
Okay, and no objections?
Great. Salah, did you want to add a point on this topic, or was on the previous topic?
It's about the flags being double-edged, and whatever good can be gained from having them unflagged for part of the module system. The flip side is that it could tie our hands in delivering ESM down the road just by saying that they are unflagged and people started using them. So that closes design space as well in a particular direction. So it could be both helpful or hurtful depending on how you look at it, right? So that's it.
Yeah, I agree with Wes's point in the chat as well, that's the whole point. We want to tie our hands. We want to make sure that these features will be in ESM because they're already in CJS.
Okay, the next item, if we're happy to move on, Jeffrey. I'll take your eating as a confirmation. The next item is the divergence specifier hazard, as we discussed last week, 371. I believe we had quite a long discussion around a lot of the nuances to do with dual mode packages and when specifiers diverge. One of the resolutions of that discussion was to add a CJS support for type module checking and loading of JS files within type module scopes to throw like we do for loading MJS from CommonJS. I actually posted a PR for that to Node.js core. So if we can get some approvals on that, it would help to be able to fast track it, since I believe we're in agreement on that. I'm just seeing if I can get the link here now. So if everyone agrees on that, and then also if anyone has anything further to discuss about the divergence specifier hazards.
I also did a PR with the documentation update, also per our last meeting. I think Jordan had asked for like more explanation of how someone would publish a package that had CommonJS and ESM sources. So that's up there. Once this other PR about .main gets merged in, my PR would get expanded a little bit to cover that. Like now we have two mains situation, but I wrote this for the current situation until that PR then would amend it. Was there anything else we needed to do from the documentation front?
Which PR is that, Jeffrey?
Let me look it up. Hold on. Here, I just put it in the chat.
So maybe if we could get a few more reviews of that PR, that would help quite a bit to move this forward. And then would those two things resolve the overall issue that we've got posted there as well, do you think?
I think the PR meets what I asked for, which is an explanation of how one would do it. The conclusion is what I expected, which is there isn't a ergonomic way to do it. The answer is you don't. You just have to like publish two packages or read documentation and like, learn the language of the README if necessary, and then figure out exactly what specifier to use. So like, to me, I appreciate the effort. Thank you, Jeffrey. I think that if we ship with this, that documentation is useful and important. But to me, I think it underscores that this is one of the, I think, more important like use cases from our original doc forever ago that we're not meeting yet. And I think it's something that's really important to meet, or there's just not really a migration strategy. Everything's just going to be a hard cutover from your whole app as CJS to your whole app as modules, or you have to like, it's just not going to be a pleasant thing. and it's going to hinder adoption of ESM. So, like, basically, I'm very concerned, and I don't want to be in a position where I'm the only one blocking progress. I don't want to block progress. Like, that was an uncomfortable place we all got to a while back, and I don't think any of us wants to repeat it. But like, I'm very concerned if we were going to unflag without this use case being met. I think that it would be better not to have modules at all than.
Well, I think it's a little much to say that it's not being met. It's just not ergonomic. So there's a question of like, could it be better? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the use case was to ship a single package that can work for both, and I guess implied to me was ergonomic. Yes, I mean, and technically you can still do it with different entry points. You can have no main, and you could like tell people manually pick one, or there's lots of ways you can like force the explicitness. That's true.
Yeah, I think the only other point I would make about the docs that was one of your comments that you didn't like was that I'm kind of encouraging people to use the module field, even though Node ignores it. It at least gives them like a standardized place to look as documentation, like rather than reading someone's.
Standardized.
It's standardized if we recommend it, in the sense that it's like Node's not going to use it, but like at least it's a lot less free form than looking at a README. Like, oh, I go in the package JSON. Oh, like there's a module field. I know what that means. Like, then they don't have to go dig through the README and read English language. You know what I mean?
I mean, I agree that that's structured and that makes it better for sure. But like, if Node is going to recommend it, Node should be using it, and the reverse to me is true. And I think that it is just like we don't, it's a bad idea for everybody to like install random crap on a Ray prototype. It's a really bad idea for people to add new package JSON fields. Like, sometimes it works out really well, and many times it ends up kind of poisoning that field for future use by the community. And that's what's happened with module. If everyone had stuck with JS Next main, even, because that one's super ugly, maybe we could have used module and not had to worry about stepping on semantics. But like, the community ended up stealing the best name from Node for a field because, and so like, I think it's just a really bad idea to recommend things that Node isn't looking at.
Jan, you had a point there?
Yeah. I agree partially with Jordan that what the current interops or the current migration story is not perfectly ergonomic, but I think we had to make, or at least the way that I read the situation is, we had to make a choice between can you force your dependents to switch to a different module format, which would have been they use Lodash and now suddenly they're getting MJS because it's a newer version and they happen to write MJS. So the implicit switch. Or do we think that it's risky to implicitly switch between formats, authoring formats? And so far, our discussions have been that implicitly switching back and forth between authorship formats, between the two module systems, we have identified some situations where it's dangerous. And so far, we have been erring on the side of not breaking user code or not encouraging situations where user code might break at the expense of upgrade ergonomics. And so
other places user code might break just in different ways, to be clear.
Right, but we knew of very specific cases where implicitly switching between the module formats might break without anybody expecting it to break. So that's currently where we are at. And I agree that this will be an issue with migration. Like, if you are a package that has that is at the end of a multi-level dependency chain, you enabling ESM will most likely for the longest time not matter, because none of the intermediate packages will actually use that code, which is, too bad. And I agree that that is not a great outcome. I'm just not seeing an alternative so far that doesn't have the risks, and I'm on the side of I'd much rather have a ecosystem where people don't accidentally break and have to roll back, and we get into weird popular package does it and breaks the internet and all these kinds of things. So I would err on that side right now, which means that yes, upgrade ergonomics right now is not a great story. Yeah.
I have my hand up. I think there are a few very large and popular packages that have singletons and thus could accidentally fall into the hazard that you and others have expressed concern about. And that would be very high profile. But in the scheme of things, that's a very sharp minority. I think what is a very far more likely hazard that will happen with the current setup is that people will switch to module syntax in a non-major version. And that will break tons of people over and over and over again. And they will have to roll back, and that is something that could happen with like React or, Redux or whatever, but also will happen with even the tiny modules, whereas the singleton one will only happen with a fraction of a percentage of the modules that are in use. So like, I agree that I don't want either of these hazards, obviously, they both suck, but like the singleton hazard is already understood. It already happens with duplication, and pure depths remains the solution. And I realize and agree that the ESM, the ESM thing adds another way that it can bite you, but all the people maintaining singleton things are already super paranoid about their singletons. And they've like, so I think the likelihood that it will happen frequently is low. I'm sure it will happen. It's already happened once, as was pointed out, but like, I think that, and when it happens, the solution would be straightforward. It's just put your singleton in one file and not two files. Meaning if it's a singleton, it should be defined in a single place. And as long as you follow that relatively common sense rule, you will never hit this hazard beyond the pure dep one that already exists. So for me, I think that it's a much more conservative and safer approach to allow for the interop and not the current situation. Yeah, and as was said in chat, yeah, pure deps do not solve this new wrinkle that ESM adds. That is true. Pure depth solves the version dependency thing. But if you combine pure depths with singleton means single place to define it, then the problem is obsoleted. So for me, that means that it's not worth worrying too much about, other than having some documentation and like keeping an eye out on all the big libraries for these types of issues.
If I might just add to that as well, I think there's a whole space of ways that people can approach handling this, from dynamic import with top level await or require checks, or lots of different ways of sort of looping through the different module systems. And we have to remember that the JavaScript community is in general incredibly creative when it comes to backwards compatibility and using new features. And there's probably a whole bunch of ways this stuff can be done. And I guess we just need to be aware of that and make sure that that we're managing the part of it that we can manage. And I think that we've approached this hazard in such a sensible way is great. But I don't think we should overlook that there will be a whole bunch of ways of handling these problems in user land that probably crop up too. And it's probably also worth thinking, I know it's the next agenda item, but it's probably also worth thinking about what the implications are for an exports field on that as well, because that also provides a sort of a branching at a per environment level, which is very different to within the same environment branching, which is the bad thing. Jan, did you also have another point on that?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to when I was previously talking about hazards, about transparently switching between the systems. What I was also referring to was not only the singleton one, but also people are used to relying on the Babel TypeScript interop, as in magical properties on the exports that make it switch as if named imports would exist. And my concern is more that you have an ESM package depending on a previously CommonJS package. It does a refactor, suddenly claims that it is the exact same package, but it has now an ESM implementation, and everything blows up because it wasn't actually the exact same interface, and the using package now implicitly gets switched over to that, in quotation marks, new ESM implementation. And I'm also concerned, like speaking about people accidentally doing these de facto breaking changes in minor versions, that's another one. And I think that's, in the large scale of things, that would be the thing I'm actually more concerned about than the singleton hazard. I agree with Jordan that the singleton hazard is for very specific packages that are very stateful, that do instance of checks, which are not very common in the ecosystem otherwise. But people thinking that they didn't break the interface by adding an ESM version, that for me is the more likely one that could lead to problems accidentally.
So Jan, how is that different with the current recommended approach of creating a second entry point and second interface in your package documented in the README, or creating an entirely second package? Like, how is the risk of having two divergent interfaces any different there?
Their dependent will not implicitly switch over. So if the dependent is
it would require an explicit,
yeah, you have to actually change the way you import the package to get the different version. Now, there's still the chance that they have a minor version and they make the default ESM and have a /CJS, but
Sure.
At least they make a very explicit choice to mess up.
And for what it's worth, I have no objection to, as a package author, to putting something in my package JSON that enables it to be kind of dual mode in the ways we've talked about, thus making it an explicit choice and perhaps addressing that concern. My goal is that consumers of my package don't have to make an explicit choice, and I don't mind having to do a little extra work to convince Node that I mean it, if that would suffice.
Yeah, I think
that's a good, thank you for bringing up that concern.
Sensible thing, and might be also an additive feature even. Like, it wouldn't even have to be in the very first version because it would be an additive thing. But I think it's very worthwhile to think about something like that. It's a good point.
Salah, were you going to add something there as well? Sorry, I missed your hand there.
No, it got actually addressed, so I'll just be reiterating painfully slowly something already said. Thanks.
Sure. Is everyone happy if we move on to the next item, or is there more to discuss on this? I'll take that as a yes. So the next item is revisit .main in the exports field 368 on modules. And this is proposed by Jan, that we should reintroduce a way to allow exports to also map the main entry point of the package. And the sort of motivating use cases are both a kind of a dual environment use case, as well as ensuring that all the features available to exports are also available to the main entry point. And going into an example of a sort of a polyfill use case around how you might polyfill a standard module with that. I've got a PR up on Node Core for this. Let me just get the PR.
I think, thanks to Miles' comment earlier, it actually has 2 collaborator approvals now.
Ah, so we've got it. Okay, perfect. So that's 29494. And so yeah, this means that we can merge this, and as well as supporting the .main, it also supports a shorthand form, which is a direct string. So you would be able to use in the package.json file exports as a field mapped to a string, which would apply both in CommonJS and in ES modules, basically then acting like a new main, but with the added feature that it encapsulates the package. So you can't access subparts by default. So it would sort of be a singleton package, effectively, that only has one exported module that it sort of exposes. Yeah, so I'm very pleased to see this moving forward. Salah?
So are we saying that this is always going to be a bare package, or unless it has a nested package, it will, you know, like I think import package name, for instance, is different from import package name slash sub package name that has a different package JSON. So if we're saying dot slash here effectively makes this a bare package, does it eliminate sub packages that have their own package JSONs from being searched?
Jan, was your comment in response to that?
Yeah. Just very quickly in terms of reducing confusion, we will only ever look at a single exports entry and only ever for bare specifiers, which means that if you have a subdirectory that has another package JSON that tries to remap something to something that then remaps again, it will not work. So we look at exactly one package JSON that has the exact mapping, and from there, that is the resolution. So if you have a bare specifier slash a directory slash something, it will only look at the package JSON for the bare specifier itself.
So are we saying that a sub package means that you go up until the top package JSON so that it's always consistently assuming it's a sub package to a package that cannot have a sub package?
It doesn't go up, basically. So the thing that it does is it pre-parses the specifier, splitting it into this is the name of the package and this is the subpath, and will only then look for a package JSON for the package name, which means that exports as is in Node right now does encode that a package is either a scope slash name or just a name. It does not allow you to create node module slash foo slash bar slash zap and treat that as a package.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thanks.
All right, shall we move on to the next item then? The next item on the agenda is loader hooks. And issue 351 is Alex's issue tracking some of the new loader developments. Bradley, did you want to give us an update on that, perhaps?
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this right now, honestly. I think there are more pertinent things for getting 12 out the door. But we did split up the hook into two different resolve and retrieve hooks, which we agreed upon. We've altered the data format somewhat, and I've tried to update the examples. We added a kind of interesting solution to a problem with composing nested instrumentation. We still have to add some more success criteria about nested instrumentation of userland modules and not just built-ins, but overall, I think it's okay. I don't think we'll get progress enough on this for LTS constraints that we're talking about for other features. We'd have to try to unflag it during the LTS like they did for HTTP2. So I think we can focus elsewhere for now.
To try and, sorry, Jeffrey, did you want to start?
Yeah, I just had some questions. So one, I guess maybe we should probably update the docs before LTS just to let people know, like, oh, this is still in progress. This is what we're thinking, blah, blah, blah. Just because I feel like once we unflag ESM in general, people are going to ask about this. So I assume that's probably doable before LTS. And then the other question I had was, can you just post somewhere, maybe on that issue, like if I wanted to like pull down this branch and check it out and try writing a hello world loader or something like that, like, can you give me enough information to get started on doing that, just so I could like kind of see
We don't have
what's
a
there?
branch implemented for this. It's all spec.
Oh, I thought someone was working on code.
We have old versions of it, but they do not use the current design document.
Like old versions like from 2 years ago? you mean?
Last July. But,
Okay.
I mean, the difference there is not huge. We could update it, but the splitting of the hooks and the pinning would be somewhat significant.
Okay, so I guess what's their overall status then? We're just still doing work into the design doc, and we're not going to start coding until that's more finalized, or is there someone, or is it ready to start coding, but there's just no one available to work on it?
I don't know. I don't have work hours to spend on it personally, so somebody else could.
Jan, wasn't there someone on your team working on this?
There is a former intern who is now going back to school, who still oh, Alex.
Hi. Yeah, I'm certainly available to work on it. I've been waiting, or the past couple of weeks I've been moving and starting classes, but I'm definitely ready to start working on things as they are getting more solidified, which they appear to be.
The future of Node depends on you, Alex.
Though I definitely would look towards Bradley for what he thinks on that.
Just one thing I want to point out is at some point I used the old loader hooks to prototype the package exports and all of that. I'm wondering, and it's something I can also participate in, if we can do first-class implementation on the existing loader hooks to mimic the prototype of the future hooks that we want to actually achieve. It's like, you know, making a loader for the system to make us simulate how the new one would work. Anybody interested in this idea?
What do you mean by simulating? Like what wouldn't?
Well, currently the loader hooks that are in Node are basically, I think, just the one resolve hook. Is there a way we can try to, you know, get more out of that hook towards the behaviors that are being proposed in the new design? So by simulate here is like using the existing hooks to showcase how the new hooks would behave, basically. Is there a good way to wrap the existing hooks to give the illusion of the new hooks?
That's a possibility, I guess. There's a lot of deeper implementation that would need to happen for separate worker thread loaders and things like that. But I do have a cleaned up multiple loader hook composition based on the current implementation branch that I could potentially merge, or at least like test with, and maybe add some of the other features that we're talking about in the design doc.
So can I ask you if it requires any work to be done on the module wrap level, or is it all pure JavaScript?
It's been a while since I've looked at it. I can get back to you on that, I think.
Yeah, I guess we can take it offline. We can discuss that in loader hooks.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
Jan, did you have your hand up earlier?
That was the wrong button. Yes, but I think it's addressed if we just take it offline. It was basically around minute details around where to put the implementation, but I think that's something that we have to discuss in the big group right now.
If I could just follow up, whenever there is something that I can take a look at, if you could please make it public, I'd love to hear about it.
It looks like Alex has at least a building branch that could be checked out and experimented with if you are willing to build Node, right, Alex?
Not following the current design doc, but something that adds multiple hook composition to the current loader implementation, the -- loader implementation. And I'll post a link to that.
Thanks.
If I might just add, it sounds, given that loaders has become this kind of big monolithic thing that's difficult to tackle, it does seem sensible if we can try to approach it in maybe smaller chunks. So perhaps supporting the PRs progressively, like landing multiple loaders and then landing various upgrades to the API until we reach convergence with the design doc, which is itself stable at this point. I mean, Bradley, would you say the design doc is ready to go and ready for implementation?
Yeah, I would say we would want implementation feedback at this point if we need to change stuff.
So my main concern would just be if we were to unflag modules, but still have the current loader implementation, what would the consequences be for the flags? Would we still use the loader flag?
So there is
experimental.
There's some history here for HTTP2 at least. And there are two things we could do. Most likely what TSC will want us to do is keep the experimental flag for loaders. However, we can still unflag and have breaking changes on experimental features. HTTP2 had a breaking change without a flag in a minor because they put the API as experimental even after they unflagged it. Likely, at least for the loaders, we could try to do that and have it marked as experimental and breaking with it being unflagged. I don't think people would like if we shipped a big breaking change for that. However, if that doesn't work, we can still ship with the loaders under an experimental flag. So it would be up to the TSC basically just to give us the go-ahead that we can remove the experimental flag for loaders. For HTTP2, they did allow removing the flag even though a breaking change was expected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is that a agreement from the TSC that we should aim to get soon then, potentially?
I believe we would go through the LTS working group before the TSC. Miles would know more.
Sure, maybe we can follow up on that one as well. Jan?
Skipping over what I wanted to say originally, should we just, for this meeting, say we ping Miles on the loader hooks issue, asking him to bring it up with the LTS working group?
It sounds sensible to me. And we should probably move on that sooner rather than later, because if it's going to be a problem, we need to know about it. And another option could be if we could work out how to make the bare minimum changes to the loader API such that it can be backwards compatible or forwards compatible with the new design. And maybe there's a way that we could do that. For example, it could still be running in the same realm and thread, but expose the new modern API that we have from the design documents. There would still be a risk of breaking changes if it's experimental, but it might get us closer to something that would provide that backwards compatibility on the LTS. Salam?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I think if the more popular hook being used in current loader uses is really the resolve hook, then we could potentially rename that as a resolver flag, which says that this is a very particular hook that we had and has had significant use. But if we want to support backwards compatibility for more hooks, like the dynamic instantiate, I believe, I believe it will get very tricky to try to promise interop backwards compatibility based on the new design and realms and all of that. I'm hesitant to think that it will be possible to to have a good backwards compatibility story with the existing way we looked at it. I might be wrong, though.
Bradley, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't feel like we need to have backwards compatibility constraints on experimental features.
Yeah.
How I would phrase it is, I think it's a very worthwhile goal to try to get make breaking changes as quickly as possible so that we can get a forwards compatible, backwards compatible, whatever you want to call it at that point, version of the Loader API, even if it is experimental. Like no matter what, I think what Guy was saying earlier about that makes sense because it will reduce the pain one way or another. But I think, at least from my current perception, the realistic goal would be to have something that is at least de facto experimental by the time we go LTS. And whether that's, and I think that actually for loaders, since they require an additional flag anyhow, if that flag would be called -- experimental loader equals, it still seems fine. But also,
I don't even think we'll need the experimental. I think if it's clear it's an experimental API.
Yeah, and I think what is special about the Loader API is it's top level. It doesn't bleed into the ecosystem as much as other module system things. So I would be less concerned about breaking changes because you don't have 10 levels of dependencies depending on the loader flag. Most likely you have maybe a loader dependency depending on the interface, but then you explicitly set a flag to use that loader dependency. Like it's not an ecosystem breaking change. It's just a very specific thing change. And I assume that if we go LTS with something, that we then have to coordinate with the realistically handful of people using the Loader API actually, like the big instrumentation or require hook customers. Like there's not a lot of them. I think it's very practical to make a breaking change to it, as long as we mark as experimental.
I personally think it would just be useful to ensure that there are, even if it is a breaking change, a way to write loaders that can still work in previous versions of Node. So for example, currently we rely on the exports of the loader module, and just ways to ensure that that's still manageable from a kind of a JS feature section perspective. So you don't suddenly get locked out of, you're either building a loader for Node 12 plus or not. It would be nice to still be able to support that. Salah, did you have another point to add on that? Salah, you're still muted. Okay, we've got 7 minutes left, so we should probably move on unless you still want to add something, Salah. All right. The next item on the agenda, just in terms of resolution for loaders, we want to say that we want to double check on the path for LTS here based on following up the process. Has someone at least got that written down and something we can follow up on in the notes? Good. All right. The next item is package exports 341.
Skip.
We can skip this one, sure. And then the last one is Jan's PR for importing a package using. Do you have the PR link for that, Jan, on Node? Sure. So
Yes.
The proposal is to be able to import with the ampersand and get, well, the @ sign, and be able to import a package as if from within the package itself, and get all the exports, behaviors, and everything as if you were importing it from Node modules. And the benefits are you don't have to use backtracking, you don't have to, and you've got testability of exports. So yeah, did you want to give us an update on the status? Yeah.
Yeah, there has been a bunch of discussion back and forth about options, specifiers. I think that, as far as I can tell, there is an acceptable compromise now with the @ sign, where nobody is actively objecting to it. It doesn't have any wildly used existing semantics. It's kind of, you can think about it as the non-scope, so you can even come up with a way of explaining it with the @ prefix for npm scopes. It's, you can explain it away if you want to. But I think it was one of the last actually important blockers for exports, where something needed to be done for exports. So I think this unblocks it. I think it's a feature that is also useful for some applications, especially if the application itself is not using exports, then it suddenly turns into a convenient require from root, which I personally hate, but people want it. So if they really want to, they could misuse features to get it. Otherwise, I could move it from do not merge to an actual pull request unless somebody is objecting in this group.
Well, I don't think we're going to get the Node core people to really look at it if it still says do not merge, are we? Like, shouldn't we just at least do that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that without that it doesn't get merged accidentally, because there are Node core collaborators that are going through PRs, looking what is possible to merge, and then merge it. So yeah, I definitely am looking forward to relatively quickly now remove that do not merge. There is still work to be done also. Like right now, it only has a common JS implementation, and it doesn't really have a lot of tests and no documentation. So I would have to add those pieces. But I didn't want to get into that work before I had a feeling that this group would accept it. But it sounds like it does.
+1 from me.
So in theory, it could merge within the week, given that it already has one approval.
Yeah. But I hope that I'll get around to adding the remaining implementation by the end of the week, and then we can next week merge it properly.
More approvals would still help if anyone else wants to approve it.
Yeah, I think it might make sense to delay active approvals until next week, or at least end of this week, because right now you would be approving half a PR. But yeah.
Wes had a question in the chat.
Wes, could you maybe explain that scenario in a little bit more detail?
Oh, did the behavior of the @ sign in a specifier in an eval scope, like if you import inside of an eval scope with like dynamic import or something, was that behavior decided on?
Dynamic import within the eval scope is the same as a dynamic import outside of the eval scope. So it's relative to the script containing the eval, as far as I know.
All right, but what about an indirect eval? Like the 0, eval in parentheses that you then eval.
So I think we are bound to language semantics. Like whatever the language says is the referrer is the referrer. We don't really have an influence over how it's interpreted.
All right, fair enough. I just wanted to know what the behavior was.
So for an indirect eval, it should have undefined, if I remember right, the way the dynamic import was phrased. We can look it up really quick right here if you give me a second.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a hard out right now, but yeah, I think anything else important right now?
That seems to be everything. We got through the agenda and on time.
Nice.
Yeah, great. All right, we can end the meeting there as well. Maybe we can follow up with the various threads afterwards.
Nice. Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, everyone.